Howdy, Dr. Wright here with a video as part of our history and culture work this week. I wanted to try something a bit different with our assignment this week, and it centers around an article by Peter Wiseman called Competition and Cooperation. And I'll upload it onto Google Classroom if anybody's interested, but I don't expect folks to read through the whole thing. It's fairly accessible, but it's maybe written for college students. What I want to do instead is I took a selection of the primary sources from that article and I put them in a sort of internal assessment template. And what I would like us to do over the next couple of weeks is to work on kind of rebuilding Wiseman's thesis by analyzing the primary sources. And this is a good skill for us to learn really for any class. Those of you going into IB Latin, it's a good skill for IAs. Obviously, it'll work with your history and English IAs too. That same basic skill of close reading and analyzing a text. And while we'll talk more about the specifics of that assignment during the week, I wanted to give you a very basic overview of what aristocratic competition is, why it's so important to Roman history, and why I make such a big deal about it. So aristocratic competition obviously is aristocrats. So these are the elite, the male elite in Roman society. And for these male elites, the names are very important. Now, this one here in the center is the nomen. That's the really important one. Here it's Julius, which is an old, real blue blood Roman aristocratic family, even though they'd fallen on hard times before the famous Gaius Julius Caesar we see here. So the praenomen, or the first name, is like kind of our first name. There's only 32 attested ones in Roman history, 16 of which were common. Gaius is one of the most common ones. And that's because boys tended to be named after their fathers, grandfathers, or uncles. Girls just took the family name. So if Gaius Julius Caesar had one daughter, her name was Julia. If he had had more daughters, more Julias. And then this part here is the cognomen. Now, not everyone has one. A lot of people do. Marcus Tullius Cicero. But Gaius Marius or Marcus Antonius don't. So what gives? On the one hand, a cognomen can help determine branches of a family. So, for example, the Cornelii had a lot of branches. There were the Cornelii Scipiones. There were the Cornelii Lentuli. There were the Cornelii Sullae. We've heard of Sulla, or we will. So that can be one reason to have at third name. Another one is not a cognomen, that should really be up here, but an agnomen. And that is usually something you get because of something great you did. So we talked about a Cornelius Scipio. Publius Cornelius Scipio conquered Hannibal in Africa, so he became Scipio Africanus. The other way to have even kind of a fourth name is if you're adopted. So Augustus is born Gaius Octavius, the Rhinus. He's adopted by his great uncle Julius Caesar, and when you're adopted, you take your adopted father's name, and sometimes you will put at the end a version of your own family name. So the Scipio who ended the Third Punic War was Scipio Aemilianus, and that Aemilianus tells us that he was adopted, and it also tells us the family he was adopted from, the Aemilii, another big, old, important Roman family. So the reason why we call Augustus Octavian until about 27 BC, when he gets the name Augustus, is to help modern students and historians distinguish him from his famous great uncle. Octavian himself very much did not want to distinguish himself from his uncle, so he was always Gaius Julius Caesar, and only his enemies, like Mark Antony, would call him Octavianus. Mark Antony famously said that Octavian is a young man who owes everything to his name, which is both true because by going as Gaius Julius Caesar, he was able to get the support of Caesar's old troops. But it also points to us about how important Roman names are, especially the family names, in Roman aristocratic competition. So I called these guys these elites. The Latin word would be nobilis, and that's where we get the word noble. The original elite were the patricians, and they were derived from the 100 senators appointed by Romulus, and these included big famous families like the Julii, the Fabii, and the Cornelii. But other families of the plebeians, that was basically originally just everyone who wasn't a senator, they become part of the elite when they are allowed to be elected to the consulate after 367 BC. And these include famous and important families in the late Republic like the Metellii, the Licinii, like Crassus, and the Sempronii, like the Gracchi brothers. Now, whereas in the foundations of Rome, these might have been economic classes, by the time we get to the late Republic, they are primarily social classes. In fact, many plebeian families are richer than patrician families. The Julii were on real hard times until Gaius Julius Caesar's aunt, Julia, married a plebeian, Gaius Marius, who was very rich and was very influential at Rome. So what's the goal of aristocratic competition? Well, put simply, it's to be summus, optimus, maximus. First, best, and greatest. My old teacher, Will Batstone, put it a bit differently. He would say that the reason that Rex, king, is a dirty word at Rome is because secretly everybody wants to be king. That's what being first, best, and greatest is. But the distinction is here it can only be for a short amount of time. The length of a military campaign really being the longest. The length of office is just 1 year. And you want to also then leave a memorial for yourself for all time. But how do you become first, best, and greatest? It's in service to the Republic. So aristocratic competition is subordinated, as much else is, in Roman thought, to the good of the Commonwealth, of the Republic. Where it begins to break down is when you start to get people like a Pompey or a Caesar who reverse that subordination and put their needs, their dignitas, Caesar would say, above that of the Republic. So while it works, it's a good system. Everyone's striving to do great, so the Republic gets bigger and better. But then, well, maybe it gets a bit too big. So what are some of the ways that you can serve the Republic? Well, I should have put it first, but military service is the key one. Roman politicians are also soldiers by necessity. Another way to do it, especially later in the Republic, because this is what Cicero did, is knowledge of the law, in Latin jurisprudence, which comes over in English. You would use these two things, speaking in the law courts and military service, to gain electoral offices in the cursus honorum, culminating in a consulate, which would give you a military command. And then you would want to spend judiciously the money earned on the military campaigns for the benefit of the Republic. And that can include things like bonuses for your soldiers. That could include building new temples or refurbishing them. You don't have to give away all the money. They're not going to say that. You get to keep some of it. But you got to spend some of it on the good of the larger commonwealth, the res publica. So the Latin word for booty is manubia. So that's why we call temples like this manubial temples. These are all from the 2nd century BC. They are Republican temples. Nobody knows who they're for. We have various guesses that scholars debate on. This is called the Lago Argentina. It's in the center of Rome. And you can't really see it in this picture, but all the cats in Rome live here. Another example would be the Pantheon. Now this was constructed by Marcus Agrippa, and that's what you see in the inscription. Marcus Agrippa, the son, Filius, of Lucius, remember, names are important, made this, so the temple itself is the direct object, when he was consul for the 3rd time. Now, it's important to note this is actually a restoration by Hadrian. That's what the modern building is here in Rome. But Hadrian kept the original inscription as a sign of sort of imperial humility. But again, names are important. When you build these temples and you restore them, you put your name on it. Here, it's been saved thanks to Hadrian. But on these, well, where would you put the inscriptions? Those parts aren't really there. The cats have taken them. Another thing would be a basilica, which is kind of like a marketplace or a mall. The Basilica Aemilia, again, a big, important family name. Marcus Aemilius Lepidus is one of the members of the 2nd triumvirate. It would have obviously been bigger and more stuff there today, or in olden times, is what it looks like today. This is a model of what it might have looked like. Faneuil Hall is sort of a good approximation of this basic design, the basilica design. You see it repeated in a lot of different kinds of things, churches in Rome, for example, and it's noted by the big central passage or aisle flanked by two kind of smaller side ones. So again, think Faneuil Hall in Boston. This is the Science and Engineering Library at The Ohio State University, so you can guess who I originally made this PowerPoint for. But again, you see the big central hall here, marked and flanked by the two side hallways. And it's hard to get any pictures of this because they plant all the trees in front. Coinage is another way that you can memorialize a successful career. Look, again, putting the names on them here. Caesar. Here with victory and a victory chariot on the other side. Here's another coin. So again, you've got the head of a goddess or divinity and then victory on the other side from a Servilius, son of Marcus. Here is a coin of Julius Caesar minted in 49 featuring a tropaeon, where we get our word trophy. And in ancient battlefield trophies, you take the armor and weapons of the opponent, in this case a Gallic warrior, and put them up on a tree to symbolize how you have won the battle. So this is Caesar trying to say, like, I'm a great conqueror. I conquered Gaul. And we tend not to think about the message in images on our money today, partly because we pay for so many things digitally with debit cards. But if you actually take, quarters, dollar bills, and so forth, there's a lot of imagery and messaging on there. A lot of it's in Latin, too. Another coin of Caesar. Here we have, also minted in 49, here we have an elephant, and it looks like it's about to crush a snake or a dragon. This is actually probably a Gallic war horn called a carynx, which actually was in the shape of a snake. And on the other side here, the tails side, we have a ladle, a scythe or a sickle, an axe, and a special priest's cap. All of these are different images of Roman priesthoods. Why would Caesar put that on the other side? Because at the time, from 63 on, he was Pontifex Maximus. He was the head of Roman religion. And if that title sounds familiar, that's the Latin term for the Pope. So Caesar was the Pope of Rome. And so he's saying both, I am a great conqueror, conquered Gaul, like here, and also, I have the will of the gods. You can also memorialize careers in literature, like with speeches, as Cicero did, history, which Caesar did, in epic poetry. We know that others wrote epic poems about what Caesar did in Gaul and Britain, including Cicero. And to go back to how important names are again, there are also the family traditions. One is the death mask, these wax images or imagenes, which is not quite what these are, because these are busts, that would be displayed in the sort of living room of the family home. And at funerals for an aristocrat, actors would be hired to put these masks on and portray these family members and even give some speeches at the funeral. So today we kind of fulfill the memorializing need at home with family pictures. But for the Romans, then, you would have to then hire actors at the funeral to portray grandma or something. The deeds of the past family members were meant to be a spur to virtue. Another way to think about it is, the faces are watching you. Rome is what we call a face-to-face society, so you're competing under the gaze of your fellow aristocrats, but also, in this analogy, your previous family members. And all of these war trophies and family heirlooms were in the atria of elite Roman houses to show off to guests. There was, in fact, a rule that you couldn't remove war trophies from a house, even if you sold it. And then major families also had oral traditions about their family deeds. These would be part of the funeral speeches the actors would give. But what if you don't have this long family background? You're not a big plebeian family, you're a big patrician family. You're what the Romans would call a numan, or a novus homo. This is a politician who gets the consulate despite having no illustrious ancestry. And the two most important ones towards the end of the Republic are Gaius Marius, Caesar's uncle, and Marcus Tullius Cicero. They had to rely on their own effort and merits, and also the patronage of others more established families. But they would also draw upon the examples of all famous past Romans, no matter what family they are, precisely because they couldn't draw upon their own famous ancestors. The Latin saying is that they are known from themselves rather than from their ancestry. A good example today, it's a lot harder for someone named Ed Markey, who is only known for being Senator Ed Markey, to maybe run for a Senate seat against someone with the last name Kennedy. Yes, of those Kennedys. And the Kennedys are a really great example because Kennedys today basically run on their name, or specifically the names of their grandparents, whether their grandparents were John or Teddy or Robert. So that's what someone like Cicero has to go up against, running here against someone named like Kennedy or Adams or Lowell. Some examples of historical epic in Rome. You don't have to go through a ton of these, but Naevius, Ennius, Cicero wrote one. Virgil is the most famous one. Lucan and Silius Italicus. All of these still exist. These top three don't. We should be pretty glad that Cicero's doesn't. The fragments we have are quite terrible. So, to recap, aristocratic competition is the driving ideology of the Roman elite. It provides a set of codes of behavior and achievement. Virtus, military courage being important, service in Rome being the achievement that's important. It establishes set roles for achievement in serving the Republic in terms of the ladder of offices and how you serve the Republic, basically in war. And it draws upon the authority of an illustrious past to justify the power of the aristocrats as well as advance the claim of one family over another. And it also possesses a variety of ways for a successful aristocrat to be remembered so that he can inspire future generations. The goal is to be first, best, and greatest, to be the top Roman of one's own generation, if not of all time. And it depends on something called exemplarity, which can be of both people and events, and it's their stories that dictate how you should behave or how not to behave. Lucius Junius Brutus, pictured here, creepily staring at a young Dr. Wright, is an example of a great early Roman. He drove out the kings. He is a symbol of freedom. Marcus Brutus claimed descent from him and used him as an example of why he killed Julius Caesar. So a good Roman example, and this is the first passage in our IA template, is this guy named Lucius Caecilius Metellus. That's one of those big families we mentioned earlier. So this is from Pliny the Elder, and it's the first passage in that packet. Lucius Metellus was a pontifex, like Caesar, twice consul, dictator, master of horse, which is sort of second in command to a dictator, and quindecemvir for the distribution of land, kind of what it says. He was the first to lead elephants in a triumphal procession during the First Punic War. And Wiseman will point out that this language of being first to do something is very important in these types of accounts. In the funeral oration his son Quintus Metellus wrote, he achieved the 10 greatest and best things which wise men spend their whole lives seeking. He wished to be the first of warriors, the best of orators, the most valiant of commanders, to be in charge of the greatest affairs and held in the greatest honor, to possess supreme wisdom and be regarded as supreme in the Senate, to come to great wealth by honorable means, to leave many children, and to be the most distinguished person in the state. These things he achieved, and none but he achieved them since Rome was founded. So again, our language of first to lead elephants, first one to achieve all these things, all these 10 things. Look at all the use of superlatives, first of warriors, best of orators, most valiant, greatest honor, supreme in the Senate, most distinguished person. And it also gives us a code of behavior. You want to get rich, but you got to get rich the right way, through war. So what are your rewards? Well, wealth, we just mentioned that. But then there's this word dignitas, and I mentioned it a few minutes ago about Caesar. What is this? It's the sense of honor and achievement a successful Roman attains in his career. It is both one's own self-worth and the worth one has amongst his peers. Caesar, for example, claims that Pompey went to war with Caesar because he wanted no one to equal him in dignitas. Lucan, writing later and very much anti-Caesar, claims that Caesar went to war because he wanted nobody ahead of him in dignitas. And Caesar himself says, admits he goes to war because he feels his enemies have harmed his dignitas. This seems, because we think of it as derivative dignity, this seems to us a really silly reason to go to war on first glance. And it's a sign of the gap between how we think and how the Romans think, that for Caesar, his dignitas was, in fact, yes, that important, that he would go to war over it and say so, not even try to hide it. And then the real marker that you've won aristocratic competition is to get a triumph. The triumph is a massive parade and religious ceremony granted to a general who had special success in war, which included, as far as we can tell, you got to kill like minimum certain number of enemies. Your troops have to acclaim you as imperator. And here's the trickiest part: your senatorial peers have to vote to approve the triumph. That's where a lot of people get tripped up. Caesar, in fact, was forced by his enemy Cato to choose between either having a consulate or a triumph. Everyone figured he'd choose the triumph. He proved them wrong by choosing the consulate instead, and then years later celebrated no less than four triumphs, in fact, over 4 days. You are the face, you can't quite see here, this is from HBO's Rome, is painted red because you are meant to look like the god Jupiter Optimus Maximus, whose temple is on the Capitoline, and it's where the triumphal parade ends. So in other words, you get to be God for a day. How else could you truly know that you were Summus Optimus Maximus? And again, think of how we're using Optimus Maximus, best and greatest, in terms of our goals of aristocratic competition. And where does the parade end? But at the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, Jupiter best and greatest. It's the most important temple in Rome. Here's all that's left of it, the foundations in the Capitoline museums. That's part of what the roof would have looked like. The problem is, aristocratic competition and dignitas are both zero-sum. There are only so many political offices, 2 consuls a year. Triumphs are very hard to get. If you get more dignitas, that means that someone else has lost theirs. There's only so many military commands to go around. Well, I think actually that we can close things out here for today, because I've given you a good enough of an overview, as well as hinting at some of the problems that lie ahead. And this, I think, will give you enough background to start to work on this modified mini IA project. I'm also going to post this onto Google Classroom, the video and the PowerPoint. And I know, as you see, there are at least a couple more slides. We can talk about those maybe on a Google Meet on Friday. But I'd like you to have this kind of background separately. So I hope you guys had a restful April break. We'll see you guys back real soon. And unfortunately, as you've probably heard right now, we're going to be doing this for the duration, this remote learning. So we'll have to make the best of it. All right, have a great week, guys. We'll see you soon.